Power doesn't reveal who you are. It reveals who you pretend not to be. Ever wonder what happens when authority meets dignity and refuses to back down? Let us know in the comments section below where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to support more stories like this that honor the strength and sacrifice of our veterans. Officer Kyle Mercer liked the feeling of control. That slow rise of adrenaline when someone flinched at his tone, the rigidness of his posture when he stepped out of the cruiser, the way his boots struck the pavement like a warning. To him, the badge wasn't just a job. It was armor, a way to rewrite the chapters of his life where he was once invisible, where men like his father, quiet and obedient in the face of power, taught him that silence meant survival. But Mercer wasn't silent anymore. Then. 41. En route to report suspicious vehicle. Blue Range Rover, solo black male, no plates visible, he said into the radio, his voice clipped, eyes fixed on the vehicle parked at Pump 6. The sun had dipped below the skyline, leaving behind the hazy shimmer of a southern twilight, and in the white glow of the gas station lights, the man in the Range Rover stepped out slowly. Tall, broad-shouldered, calm. Too calm, Mercer thought. Too confident. He didn't like that. The man walked around to the pump with the relaxed precision of someone used to being watched and used to being in charge. Mercer narrowed his eyes. He already hated him. General David Braxton was unaware he was being watched by the kind of man who felt threatened by presence alone. He had learned, over decades in uniform, that his skin entered the room before he did, and now, even out of uniform, even in retirement, even with a heart softened by grandchildren and Sunday breakfasts and quiet walks with his wife, he still moved like a soldier. Not by force, by choice. He felt the car before he heard it, that subtle shift in the atmosphere, a stillness, a silence too deliberate. The cruiser coasted into the lot and braked hard. Mercer exited before the wheels fully stopped. Braxton looked up, and for the briefest moment his mind scanned the situation like he had 1,000 times before. Location, terrain, escape route, intent. "Evenin', officer," he said evenly, pulling his wallet from his coat before Mercer had spoken. "Step away from the vehicle," Mercer barked, one hand already hovering above his sidearm. Braxton's eyes flicked toward it, then back to the man's face. He said nothing, just held out his wallet calmly, the military ID visible in the clear flap. Mercer didn't take it. "What are you doing here?" Mercer asked, stepping forward, posture swelling. "Getting gas," Braxton replied, not sarcastic, just factual. "I didn't ask for attitude." "And I didn't give you any?" "You alone?" Braxton didn't respond immediately. He closed the wallet and lowered it. "Is there a reason for this, officer?" "I asked the questions," Mercer snapped. People began to notice. A mother dragging her child toward the minivan 2 pumps over. A young man across the lot lowering his phone slightly. A store clerk pressing their face to the window from inside. David didn't move. Mercer stepped closer, invading the small circle of space that soldiers, especially generals, never let go undefended. "Turn around, hands on the cart." Braxton let the silence hang, heavy and sharp. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped back and placed his palms flat on the hood of his own vehicle. "You're making a mistake," he said softly. Mercer cuffed him. "Tight, too tight." David grunted but said nothing. "Not yet." Mercer pulled his radio close. "Got a suspect detained. Appears non-compliant. Requesting backup." Inside the gas station, a teenage boy in a hoodie pulled his phone from his pocket and started recording. David Braxton looked across the lot and saw the boy. They locked eyes, and in that moment, just seconds long, David made a decision. He stood up straighter. He didn't speak. He let the cuffs bite, let the tension rise, let it all be seen. The world needed to see. 10 minutes passed. Backup hadn't arrived. Mercer paced. The man he cuffed wasn't resisting, But he wasn't submissive either. That annoyed him more. "You some kind of VIP or something?" Mercer asked, his voice thick with mockery. David didn't answer. The radio crackled. "Another unit? Inbound?" Mercer turned back to his cruiser, suddenly aware that a small group had gathered, maybe 5 or 6 bystanders now, silent, watching. The teenagers still recording, and a woman in scrubs near the ice machine whispering to her phone. Braxton's silence wasn't passive, it was tactical. He had done this before, not here, not like this, but under pressure, under heat, under scrutiny. He knew how to wait, how to hold position, how to let the enemy reveal their weakness. It worked. "Hey," someone called out from the crowd. "I think I know who that is." Mercer ignored it. A silver SUV slid into the lot. From it stepped a tall man in a tan deputy's uniform, steady, composed, scanning the scene with a practiced eye. Deputy Marcus Boone. As soon as he spotted the man cuffed by the cruiser, he stopped in his tracks, but then moved fast. Mercer turned as Boone approached, a hand raised but his face tight. "Everything all right here, Officer Mercer?" "Back up, finally," Mercer muttered. "Got a suspect refusing to identify." Boone's eyes dropped to the man in cuffs, and his expression cracked. "Sir," Boone said, low, almost a whisper. "General Braxton?" David gave the smallest nod. Mercer blinked. "Wait, you know him?" Boone's voice changed. It sharpened, hardened. "Uncuff him." "I said uncuff him, now." Mercer hesitated. The crowd was silent. Then came the sound, distinct, clear, of Boone clicking the mic on his shoulder. "This is Deputy Boone. I'm requesting immediate supervisor presence at the Sinclair Gas on Jefferson. We have a confirmed case of wrongful detainment. Suspect is a decorated U.S. Army general. Witnesses on site. Incident appears racially motivated." The gas station fell dead silent. Mercer froze. David Braxton still hadn't said a word, but his silence had just changed everything. The cuffs came off, slowly, reluctantly, each metal click echoing like a gabble. Mercer's hands were stiff as he released them, as if the act itself burned his skin. General David Braxton flexed his wrists once, discreetly, then let his arms fall to his sides. He didn't rub the red welts rising along his forearms, though the bite of steel still pulsed in his veins. Deputy Marcus Boone stood between them now, not a barrier, not a shield, a reckoning. "I served under him," Boone said, glancing around to ensure everyone heard it. "In Kandahar. I was a 23-year-old rookie with a chip on my shoulder and a habit of speaking out of turn. General Braxton didn't just train me. He saved me." Someone in the small crowd murmured, "That's him? The one from the news last year?" Boone nodded, barely looking away from Mercer. "That's the man who pulled an entire village out from under a collapsed school while under fire. The one who stood his ground when half of us would have run. He's a Bronze Star recipient, 2 tours in Iraq, and head of the Joint Task Force for Veteran Reintegration." His voice dropped, dangerously calm. "And you threw cuffs on him like he was a threat." Mercer's lip curled. "He didn't identify himself." "He," DeJageral said. Boone motioned to the wallet David still held loosely in one hand. "You just didn't care." David looked over at Boone for the first time since he arrived. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Recognition, gratitude, grief. Boone gave a small nod in return, just enough to say, "I've got you now." By now, more bystanders had pulled out phones. Some were already live streaming. A woman in a janitor's uniform whispered into hers. "They cuffed the general, y'all. A black general. At a gas station." Mercer's ears burned. His instincts screamed to reassert control, to shift the narrative, to remind everyone he was the authority here. But the moment had already moved beyond him. He knew it. "I'm going to need to see some verification," he said, motioning vaguely toward the ID. David handed it over without a word. Boone took it before Mercer could, holding it up to the light. David L. Braxton, retired General, United States Army, clearance level Omega. That enough for you? Mercer didn't reply. Did he raise his voice? Boone asked. Don't make any sudden movements? Got prehend he was he aggressive? Mercer's jaw worked, but the words never came. Boone handed the ID back to David, then turned to the crowd. Anyone here witness the full encounter? I did, the teenager called from across the lot, phone still steady in his hand. I got it all. Boone nodded once. Keep it safe. David finally spoke. You should send that footage to someone outside the department, not just the media. Send it to a Veterans Affairs rep or your local councilman, maybe a civil rights attorney. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even bitter. It was patient, focused, like a man used to solving the root of a problem, not the symptom. Boone's radio crackled. Unit 3, en route, ETA 2 minutes. He keyed his mic. Copy that. Be advised. Situation under control, but cameras are rolling. Supervisor presence required. The crowd had grown to over a dozen now, and the gas station clerk had stepped outside holding a phone to his chest like it might keep his heart from breaking. He glanced at David, then down at the pavement, as if ashamed just to witness it. David walked back to his Range Rover and leaned against it, slow and deliberate. He didn't look at Mercer. Not anymore. Mercer, on the other hand, couldn't look anywhere else. The shame rose in waves, not because he'd realized the man was a general, but because, for a fleeting moment, Mercer had imagined being him, confident, respected, carried by purpose rather than fear. And in that mirror, he saw the crack in his own reflection. 2 minutes later, the second cruiser pulled into the lot. A supervisor stepped out, a stocky Latina woman with short-cropped hair and no patience for performance. Chief Susan Ramirez. She scanned the scene quickly, took in the phone cameras, the stunned silence, the look on Boone's face, the restraint on David's, and the unmistakable panic riding beneath Mercer's forced calm. What's going on? She asked, stepping up. Boone answered, Unlawful detainment. Failure to verify ID. Racial profiling. The suspect is a decorated general, and we have witnesses. Ramirez looked at David. He nodded once. I offered my ID. It was ignored. I was cuffed. Were you warned or read your rights? No, ma'am. Did you resist? No. Mercer finally found his voice. He fit a description, that's all. Blue vehicle, black male, no visible plates. Plates were visible, Boone cut in. Back left was partially obscured by mud. That's not illegal. And the rest? Mercer said nothing. Ramirez sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that spoke of years cleaning up after men who made her job harder. She turned to David. I want to personally apologize for what happened here tonight. This does not reflect the values of this department. I know what it reflects, David said, and I'm not here for an apology. Ramirez hesitated. Then, what would you like? David straightened. Accountability. Public acknowledgement. A re-education of how you train your officers to assess a perceived threat. He paused, then added with quiet weight, and I want every officer in this department to spend a day with someone who's worn the uniform for something bigger than themselves. The hush fell. Boone's eyes welled slightly. He turned away before anyone noticed. Ramirez nodded. We'll open an investigation, internal review, and... No internal, David interrupted. Independent oversight. She blinked, but nodded again. Yes, sir. David turned to go. General Braxton, Ramirez called after him. He stopped. We'll make this right. He didn't answer, just got in his vehicle, started the engine, and pulled away from the station. No dramatics. No threats. Just silence and the hum of a man who had fought wars abroad, only to be questioned at home. Boone watched him leave, then turned back to Mercer. "You're going to have to reckon with what you did," he said, quiet but firm. Mercer didn't reply, because deep down, for the first time in a long time, he didn't know who he was behind that badge. And the silence that followed was louder than any siren. Marcus Boone sat in the dim light of his small kitchen, coffee gone cold in the chipped ceramic mug between his hands. The room was still, save for the distant creak of wood settling and the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the sky hadn't yet decided if it wanted to be dawn or just a darker shade of night. The incident report sat open on his laptop, cursor blinking beside an unfinished sentence. Subject was detained by Officer Mercer despite presenting valid identification. Use of force was deemed. Boone couldn't bring himself to finish it. He stared at the screen, jaw tight, one foot tapping under the table with a rhythm that betrayed the calm he wore like armor. His mind wasn't in this room. It was still at Pump 6, still watching the line cross from suspicion into violence, still hearing that awful metallic click of the cuffs snapping shut on a man who'd once risked his life to extract Boone and two others from a collapsing outpost under fire. Boone had written his resignation letter twice since that night, deleted it both times. A notification pinged on his phone. New video: general wrongfully cuffed, raw footage, gas station incident. General Braxton. Police misconduct, veteran justice. Boone's stomach dropped. He opened the video. The footage began mid-encounter, David standing still, hands raised in a practiced, calm way as Mercer's voice grew louder, more brittle. The camera trembled in the teenager's hands, but the audio was clear. Braxton's ID, Mercer's refusal, the command to turn around, and then the silence. Then Boone's arrival. By the time the video ended, the view count had already ticked over 9,000. The comment section had exploded into a digital riot. "You don't put cuffs on a general, ever. This man served the country and got treated like a criminal. Shameful. Boone is a hero for stepping in. Mercer needs to be fired. Yesterday. This is why we film everything. Respect our veterans." Boone leaned back, heart pounding, not from panic, but from the weight of knowing this wasn't going away. It had just begun. Across town, Chief Susan Ramirez had already held 2 emergency meetings by the time sunlight touched the department's glass doors. Internal Affairs was activated. The mayor had called her before sunrise, voice tight, teeth clenched. "We've got a storm coming," he'd said. "National news is sniffing around. You better fix this." She stood in her office now, blinds closed, a file open on the desk beside a rapidly draining cup of black coffee. Officer Mercer's personnel file. Thicker than it should have been. 3 prior complaints, 2 settled quietly. 1 dismissed due to insufficient evidence. But the video changed things. It didn't care about insufficient anything. She rubbed her temples, trying to piece together a containment plan that didn't feel like a betrayal to the badge she still believed in. A knock on the door. Menard. She didn't bother to look up. "It's viral, isn't it? 14,000 views as of 10 minutes ago." Ramirez sighed. "How's he handling it?" "General Braxton." She nodded. "He's not asking for vengeance," Boone said, "which makes it worse." "Because he has every right to." "Exactly." Ramirez finally looked at him, eyes tired. "There's going to be a press conference this afternoon. Mayor wants you there." Boone stiffened. "Why me? You're the one who recognized him. You're the one who de-escalated. So, I'm the cleanup guy. Knew the credibility guy." He didn't respond. She softened, just a little. "I know what I'm asking. But we need the public to see that not everyone in this uniform is blind or cruel." Billy nodded slowly. "Then say that. Out loud. Don't just let me stand next to you and pretend that fixes it." Ramirez reached for her coat. "I wasn't planning to." Meanwhile, in a quiet house lined with books and framed service medals, General David Braxton sat beside his wife on their back porch. The air smelled like jasmine and cut grass. Cynthia's hand was wrapped around his, firm and grounding. "They're calling non-stop," she said, gesturing toward the phone. "I know some of the calls are media, but others, they're veterans, friends, people who saw the footage." He exhaled slowly. "It's not about me. This time it is." David watched a squirrel dart along the fence, then vanish into the hedges. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't resist. I did everything right. I know. And it still didn't matter?" Cynthia turned to him, eyes glistening with restrained fury. "That man cuffed you like you were a threat. Like the past 4 decades of your life. Every speech, every mission, every soldier you trained meant nothing." David's voice was barely above a whisper. "He saw my skin before he saw my stars." Neither spoke for a while. The wind moved softly through the trees. Finally, Cynthia asked, "What will you do?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "I'm going to that press conference." Her grip on his hand tightened. David looked at her. "And I want you there with me." Later that day, a podium was set up outside City Hall, framed by a sea of microphones and tangled cords. Reporters fanned out like vultures with press passes, citizens lined the sidewalks. Protesters held signs, "Respect veterans," "Justice for General Braxton," and "This uniform still matters." Chief Ramirez took the podium first, flanked by Boone and 2 senior officers. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice steady. "We are here to acknowledge a grave mistake made by a member of our department, one that does not reflect our values, our training, or our promise to this community." Flashes fired from cameras. The murmurs stilled. General David Braxton was wrongfully detained during a routine stop. He presented valid identification, cooperated fully, and was still treated as a threat. That treatment was not only unjust, it was unacceptable. Behind her, Boone stood at parade rest. His eyes scanned the crowd, stopping when he saw a familiar silhouette near the front row. David Braxton, standing tall in a navy pew blazer, his wife beside him. Ramirez continued, "Effective immediately, Officer Kyle Mercer has been suspended pending further investigation. Additionally, we will be conducting an independent review of department conduct and instituting mandatory training focused on veteran interaction and racial bias response." She turned slightly. "Deputy Boone?" Boone stepped forward, cleared his throat, and gripped the edges of the podium. "I stood in the sand of Kandahar with General Braxton when I was just a kid in uniform. I watched him hold a perimeter under enemy fire so the rest of us could get out alive. That same man stood at a gas pump 3 nights ago, and someone looked at him and saw nothing but a threat." He looked out across the cameras. "We are taught to serve, to protect, but we can't do that if we're blind to who we're standing in front of. General Braxton served this country with honor, and he deserved better." Then, from the crowd, a quiet chant began. 1 voice, then 2. "Say his name." Boone stepped aside. David Braxton didn't approach the mic. He stepped in front of it. No script, no notes, just presence. "My name is David L. Braxton, retired General, United States Army." The crowd fell completely silent. "I've spent my life in service. I've led men into fire. I've held the hands of dying soldiers. I've signed papers sending people into battles I knew they might not return from. And still, 3 nights ago, my skin decided who I was, to a man with a badge." He looked directly into one of the cameras. "I'm not here to shame, I'm here to remind. Respect isn't earned by silence, it's earned by courage, in uniform and out of it." The applause didn't erupt. It built, like thunder in a distance moving closer. And when it hit hard. David stepped back. Cynthia reached for his hand. In that moment, he wasn't just a general. He was every man who'd ever saluted the flag and come home to a world still learning how to see him. Kyle Mercer watched the press conference from the back booth of a run-down bar just outside county limits. The screen above the counter flickered in poor resolution, but the words were clear. His name, his badge, his suspension. The bar was half empty, but even still, a few heads turned his way as the screen showed an image of him in uniform, one he'd once been proud of. He turned his glass on the table, whiskey untouched. The ice had melted into it, dulling the fire he used to chase away the noise. Now, even the fire didn't want to stay. "You really messed up, didn't you?" someone muttered from a few stools down. Mercer didn't look at him, just said, "Go to hell." He didn't have to see their face to know they were smirking. That's what the world was doing now, smirking at him, watching his life unravel frame by frame, post by post, headline by headline. The viral officer, the man who cuffed a hero. It wasn't supposed to go this way. We hadn't joined the force to be hated. He joined to matter. But now, the uniform he'd bled for, defended in courtrooms and alleyways, was just another costume in a collapsing act. He pulled his phone out, checked his messages. Nothing from the department, but one from his father. "All the news. You dishonored the badge. Don't come around here." He set the phone down hard, chest rising with a quiet fury. He hadn't meant for it to go so far. He'd seen the man assume the worst, just like he was taught. Observe, detain, control. Only this time, the man wasn't some dealer, some drifter, some armed suspect with a history and a half a dozen warrants. He was a general. And Kyle had never felt smaller than the moment that Black Man looked at him with no fear, just disappointment. That was the worst part. The man didn't scream, didn't shout, didn't cuss, just stood there like Mercer wasn't even worth reacting to. It made his insides churn, not with guilt, with shame. Across the city, David Braxton sat quietly in a community center conference room, listening. The event had been hastily organized, less than 48 hours after the press conference. But the chairs were full, and the faces around him were black, brown, white, young, old, and all furious. A woman stood at the front, holding a folder and shaking as she spoke. "I saw what happened to you, General. And I couldn't sleep. My son wears his ROTC uniform every Wednesday at high school. He's proud of it, but now I worry every time he walks out the door that someone will look at his skin and not his patch." There were quiet murmurs of agreement. David didn't interrupt, didn't tell her to calm down. He let her speak, and when she sat, he rose. "I want you all to know something," he began, scanning the crowd. "That moment at the gas station, it wasn't new, it wasn't shocking, it was ordinary. That's what makes it dangerous." He took a slow breath. "I've worn this country's flag on my chest in Kabul, in Fallujah, in Sierra Leone, and every time I came home I had to switch from soldier to civilian, from threat overseas to suspect at home. We're told dignity is earned, but I've learned something else. Dignity isn't granted at all when you're born black. You have to carry it yourself, even when no one sees it." The crowd nodded. Some stood. A man in the back called out, "What do we do now, General?" David didn't flinch. "You speak, you show up, you vote. You teach your kids that silence is not safety, it's surrender." Back at the precinct, Boone stood in the hallway outside the HR department, jaw clenched as he read the flyer pinned to the bulletin board. It was a memo from the chief's office. Mandatory bias and veteran sensitivity training. Attendance required for all officers within 30 days. He tapped it once with the back of his knuckle. It was something. Not enough, but a beginning. Mercer's desk was empty, his nameplate removed, locker cleared, but Boone had no illusions that removing a man erased the problem. The problem wasn't in a single bat. It was in the culture that taught that badge to suspect a man with dignity simply for not shrinking when questioned. He turned as Chief Ramirez approached from the side hallway. "You think it'll work?" she asked, glancing at the flyer. Boone shrugged. "It's not about what I think, it's about whether they listen." She studied his face. "You heard from Braxton?" "Not since the press conference." "You should reach out." "Well, he doesn't need me anymore." "Maybe not," she said, "but this city does." Boone nodded slowly, the weight of it sitting in his chest. Later that night, under the blue-black hush of a cooling sky, Boone walked the short path to David Braxton's home. The porch light was off, but the glow from inside was warm. He knocked once. David answered casual, no surprise in his expression. "Marcus." "Sir." They stood in silence for a breath. Then David opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, they sat with mugs of tea instead of whiskey. Cynthia peeked in from the kitchen, gave Boone a quick smile, then disappeared. "I wanted to say something," Boone said finally. "I've been carrying this since that night." "You don't owe me anything," David replied gently. "But I do," Boone said. "You saved my life once, in a real physical way. But what you did at that gas station, you saved something else." David tilted his head slightly. "You saved the idea of dignity," Boone continued. "You didn't yell, you didn't fight. You stood there like the man I always knew you were, and they got to see what I saw back in Kandahar, who you are under pressure." David was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I didn't do it for them, or for the cameras. I did it because if I lost my composure, it wouldn't just be me on trial. It'd be every black man in uniform who ever dared to look an officer in the eye." Boone nodded. "Then let me do my part now," he said. "Let me take that footage, that story, and turn it into training, not just for our department, but for every academy that wants to understand what respect really looks like." David met his gaze. "You really think they'll listen?" Boone smiled. "Only if the right person speaks." David exhaled through his nose, half a laugh, half a release. "All right," he said. "Let's speak." The auditorium lights dimmed as the projector whirred to life. On screen, the grainy footage from the gas station filled the wall. David Braxton, hands raised, voice calm, body still. The same footage millions had seen online now opened the department's first-ever mandatory training on racial bias and veteran engagement. There were no sound effects, no dramatic music, no edits. Just reality, raw and unembellished. In the front row sat recruits in crisp uniforms, their shoulders tense, their expressions uneasy. Behind them were seasoned officers, some defensive, some curious, a few already annoyed. They'd been through dozens of trainings over the years. De-escalation, compliance, procedural justice. Because this wasn't theory. This was a man, and he was in the room. General Braxton sat quietly in the second row, flanked by Boone and Chief Ramirez. He wore no uniform, no medals, no symbols of rank, only a dark gray sweater and the presence of someone who had led soldiers through fire and still carried the scars with grace. He didn't look at the footage as it played. He had lived it. Every second was burned into his memory like a heat map of restraint. When the video ended, Boone stood up. It didn't begin with a PowerPoint. It began with a truth. This happened 10 miles from here, to a man who spent 40 years protecting people he never met. And in under 5 minutes, he became a suspect in his own country. Silence. You've all been trained to assess risk, identify threats, and enforce the law. What you haven't been taught is how to see people outside of the lens of suspicion. He paced slowly in front of the screen. General Braxton didn't need to prove who he was. He already had. But Officer Mercer didn't see that. He saw race. He saw presence. And he saw neither of those things as belonging. An older officer in the third row shifted uncomfortably. Boone saw it, addressed it. "I know some of you think this is overblown, that Mercer just made a mistake. But that mistake could have ended with a gun drawn, a life ended, headlines rewritten to justify it after the fact. And for what?" He turned to the side, motioning to David. For the audacity of being composed. David stood calm as ever and stepped forward. "I want to speak to you not as a general, but as a man who's worn a uniform like yours, and a different one before it." He met their eyes, one by one. "When I was young, my drill sergeant told us that leadership isn't loud, it's listening, and that discipline isn't just what you do under orders, it's what you do when no one's watching." He let that hang in the air. Officer Mercer failed that test. But I'm not here to talk about him. I'm here to talk about the standard. A young woman in the back leaned forward, listening intently. David continued, "I've led teams into chaos. I've given orders that sent men into danger and had to live with the results. But not once did I ask someone their skin color before trusting them to cover my flank. And yet, standing at a gas pump in my own country, I was treated like the enemy." He took a slow breath. "I didn't lose control. Not because I wasn't angry, but because I've learned that when we lose control, the story becomes about our reaction, not the injustice." Another pause. "I know not all of you are racist. I know most of you took this job to serve. But you need to understand something. Perception is policy. If the people you serve fear you more than they trust you, then your badge is just a weapon." He stepped back. Boone took over. "This training isn't about guilt. It's about growth. You'll hear stories from veterans who've come home to a country that doesn't see them anymore. You'll talk with community members who feel invisible until they're accused. And you'll learn that a uniform is only as honorable as the heart inside it." Later, in a small breakout room down the hall, officers sat in a circle of folding chairs. No hierarchy, no ranks, just men and women in blue, listening to one man speak. David leaned forward slightly. His voice was softer now. "When I got back from my first deployment, I had a man in an airport ask me if I'd just come out of prison. I was in uniform, still had sand in my boots. Someone in the room chuckled, awkward and embarrassed. David didn't smile. I've been asked if the medals on my chest were real, if I'd earned them. I've been followed in stores, pulled over for no reason. And after all these years, I've learned something hard." He looked around the circle. "Dignity is not given. You carry it. You guard it. Because the world will try to take it from you one assumption at a time." One of the recruits, young, mid-20s, hair buzzed too short, raised his hand slowly. "What should we do when our training tells us one thing, but the moment tells us something different?" David met his eyes. "Then you slow down. You ask questions. You use your voice before your weapon. And if you make a mistake, you own it. Not with paperwork, but with action." Boone added, "If you can't tell the difference between a man who's dangerous and a man who's just standing there, then the training isn't the problem. Your lens is." After the session, as the officers filed out quietly, David stayed behind. Ramirez stepped in from the hallway. "You made them uncomfortable," she said, not unkindly. "They needed it." He gave a small nod. "So did I." She hesitated, then said, "We're opening up the training statewide. Veteran-led sessions. Community involved. You'll be the cornerstone of it, if you're willing." David looked at her for a long moment, then extended his hand. "I'm willing." As they shook hands, Boone leaned against the doorway, watching. The hallway beyond them hummed with quiet conversation, shifting attitudes, the stirrings of something that might, just might, be real change. Later that evening, David and Cynthia walked a quiet trail behind their neighborhood. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the trees. She laced her fingers through his. "You were brilliant today," she said. "I was honest." "That's what brilliance is," she said, smiling. He stopped at a wooden bench, sat down, looked out over the small lake. "For years I fought wars no one wanted to understand. Then I came home to a fight no one wanted to admit existed. And now," he exhaled, "now I'm fighting it out loud." She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, David Braxton felt the quiet not as threat, but as peace. The rusted gates of Carter Veterans Center creaked open as the first school buses rolled past, their engines humming like a slow parade of forgotten stories. Inside the courtyard, folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, and the smell of fresh-cut grass hung in the air. Flags lined the perimeter, American, state, and one that read "Veterans Stand for Justice." A small podium stood at the center of it all. David Braxton arrived without a suit, without the bars. Just a pressed white shirt, sleeves rolled, and that familiar, quiet gravity in the way he walked. A few local reporters had gathered near the back, respectful but eager. A new training curriculum was being launched that morning across the state's police departments. One that bore his name, built on his testimony, and carried the endorsement of over 40 veterans organizations. Cynthia moved beside him, smoothing the front of his shirt like she'd done 100 times before deployments. "You're about to make a whole lot of folks uncomfortable again," she said softly. David gave a half smile. "I hope so. Don't let 'em hide behind the policy talk," she added. "Make them feel it. I don't know how to do anything else." Mood was already on the steps, coordinating final details with a few community leaders and younger veterans. He turned when he saw David and gave a short nod. Not formal, not forced, familiar. It was the kind of look soldiers give each other when no one else in the room understands what they've endured. As David approached, Boone stepped down from the platform. "You ready?" "I was ready years ago," David said. "Just didn't know where the battlefield was." "Funny," Boone replied. "I think this one's finally winnable." A few minutes later the crowd had gathered, law enforcement officers from every county, young cadets from the academy, school teachers, city council members, Vietnam vets in leather vests, and high school kids sitting cross-legged on the grass. The youngest among them were silent, wide-eyed, leaning forward. David stepped to the podium. "No title today," he began, "no rank. Just a man who still believes in what this country can be." The wind carried his voice gently through the trees. "You've all seen the video, you've heard the interviews, but I want to tell you what no one saw. After I was cuffed, after that officer walked away, I stood there, hands behind my back, watching people decide whether or not I was worthy of being defended. Some walked inside the store, some got in their cars, but a few stayed. A teenager recorded the whole thing. An older woman dialed the sheriff. And someone whispered my name, because they recognized it." He scanned the crowd, locking eyes with a few officers in uniform. That whisper changed everything, not because it carried power, but because it carried truth. The truth of who I am didn't come from a badge. It came from a life of service. And the question I ask each of you here today is this: what truth are you carrying into your community? Murmurs passed through the chairs like ripples. David let the silence linger. When you put on that badge, you don't get to decide whose life matters. You only get to prove that they all do. Every call, every stop, every question. You're either restoring dignity or you're destroying it. A long pause. Then, you don't need more power, you need more responsibility. And that begins with seeing people fully. Not as statistics, not as threats, not as profiles in a database, but as neighbors, as veterans, as humans. He stepped back from the podium. Didn't wait for applause, just turned and sat in the front row beside Cynthia, who took his hand silently, her thumb brushing the side of his palm like she used to do in hospital waiting rooms between deployments. Behind him, Boone stepped up to close. He didn't read from notes. "I used to think I was a good cop because I followed the rules. he said. But after that night at the gas station, I realized I was missing something. He looked at David. I was missing the difference between law and justice. He turned back to the crowd. You can enforce the law without ever touching justice. And that's what this program is about, closing that gap. This curriculum will be in every academy within the next 6 months, and by the end of the year, every officer in our state will undergo veteran recognition and community empathy training. The first wave of applause began to build, but then something happened. The young man who had filmed the original incident, now standing just outside the circle of chairs, stepped forward. Jaden Thomas, 17, local high school junior. Nervous hands, but clear eyes. He walked to the podium, awkward, uncertain, but something in him pushing forward. He asked me to speak, he said, adjusting the mic. People quieted. I didn't know who General Braxton was that night. I just saw a man getting treated like a criminal for being calm. I didn't know if recording it would do anything, but I remembered something my mom told me. If you see something wrong, you either say something or you're part of it. A few people nodded, murmurs of agreement. I want to be a filmmaker someday, he continued. But that night made me realize something. Truth isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just one man standing still while someone else falls apart. And that deserves to be seen. Boone gave a single proud nod from the side. Jaden stepped down, and this time the applause came in full, long, sustained, earned. After the event, as chairs were being folded and media cameras unplugged, David stood near the edge of the courtyard, looking toward the flag. A young officer approached him, nervous, hat in hand. Sir, she said, I just wanted to thank you. I saw what happened to you. And I think about it every time I stop someone now. I think, what if that was my father, my mentor, my own CO from... David turned to her, nodded once. That's the question that matters. The officer hesitated, then added, They say the uniform gives us authority, but maybe it also gives us a responsibility to listen first. He smiled. Now you're starting to get it. She saluted instinctively. He returned it, slow, deliberate, hands steady, and for once it felt like a salute returned, not out of obligation, but respect. Across the lawn, Boone loaded gear into a city truck, then turned to David. You did it. We did it, David said. No. You stood your ground, and you didn't let them define the moment. David's eyes were calm but tired. It's never been about one moment, Marcus. It's about legacy, about what we leave behind. Boone nodded. Then I hope more of us learn to leave behind what you did. They shook hands, firm, unflinching, the kind of handshake passed between men who've stood in trenches others never saw. That night, back home, David sat on the porch again, this time with no cuffs on his wrists, no eyes judging him from the shadows, just the crickets singing softly beyond the trees, and Cynthia resting her head on his shoulder. He looked out into the dark and didn't feel alone in it, because now, even in silence, the world was listening. And for the first time in a long time, justice had a voice that could not be ignored, and it sounded like peace.